President Trump making some comments on tariffs and potential trade deals a short while ago. Eamon Javers has more for us. Eamon?
Hey there, Kelly. We're on the second day now of chasing this mystery of the White House trade talks with China or not. President Trump said in a Time magazine interview conducted Tuesday and released this morning that he has spoken to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. But he didn't say when or about what exactly. Now, the White House has said that the two men have not had trade negotiations directly at all. Here's how the president responded when asked about all this by reporters on the South Lawn of the White House this morning.
You spoke with President Xi. Have you spoken to him since the tariffs? When was the last?
I don't want to comment on that, but I've spoken to him many times. Yeah. From Japan? From Japan, I'm getting along very well with Japan. We're very close to a deal.
Time magazine that President Xi called you. When did that happen, and what did you discuss?
I'll let you know at the appropriate time. Let's see if we can make a deal.
So you see the president there declining to say when or where that conversation happened or what was said. Now, the president is on his way to Rome for the funeral of Pope Francis tomorrow. He said this week that several world leaders want to talk to him about trade while he's visiting, but the White House hasn't given us any indication of officially scheduled meetings so far. We'll wait for that and see if the president can do a little business on the sidelines of the funeral events that happen in Rome tomorrow, Kelly.
But the questions were getting at this idea that, okay, if the president says he's spoken to Xi, but the Chinese are saying no current negotiations are underway. Is that because there has been no direct conversation between the two of them since the recent tariff problems emerged? Right.
And the White House has told me that there were no direct conversations between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Right. So Caroline Leavitt, the White House press spokesman person, said earlier this week, rather, that the two men had not spoken directly about trade. Now we have the president himself saying the two men have spoken, but sort of being very coy about, when that conversation took place, what it was about. It's possible that Trump is referring here to, some kind of call in January when he took office that Xi Jinping might have made, something like, or even in the first term. He just says, I have spoken to him in past tense. So the White House is not clearing all this up. They want to leave it sort of ambiguous. Some officials are saying we're just going to let Trump be Trump here and let his statement stand.
Yeah. What is that, the pluperfect? What do they call it? Past pluperfect?
Going back to my middle school Latin to try to figure that out. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Eamon, stay right there.
Ex post facto.
Yeah. Our next guest expects some trade deals will start to be at least hinted at over the next several weeks. With us now is Lanhee Chen. He's a fellow at the Hoover Institution and was policy director for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign, and he has been informally advising the administration on a variety of economic issues, I think we can say. Lanhee, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
So is it going to be India first? Is Japan coming? Is it something that could surprise us?
Well, look, I think there's been good positive momentum. We've heard directly from the administration on this in terms of some of the countries that have been part of these negotiations. I think the reality is that what the tariff situation has enabled are conversations to happen with countries like Korea, like Japan, like India, where the vice president's been for the last few days. So I think that will be the focus. If I had to read it over the next couple of weeks, I think that will be hopefully the opportunity we see here. And the China situation, which you've been talking about, is a lot stickier. The fundamentals there are a lot stickier, and we've always known that it's a much more challenging relationship.
Right. So what would you say to the investing audience that they should expect out of all of this?
Well, again, I think there's been hopefully some progress made with respect to, particularly, we've talked about Japan, we've talked about Korea, we've talked about some of the likely targets. I think on China, the message that's been sent this week, we heard it from Secretary Bessent, we've heard it from other administration officials, that the current pathway is probably not a sustainable one with China, so we'll have to see what short-term de-escalation looks like. I don't see a bigger deal coming together for some amount of time. I think the two leaders are going to have to see each other face to face for that to happen. And I don't see that happening until we reach some of the more significant summits, whether it's APEC or the G20 or ASEAN on the sidelines of that, maybe as we move towards September, October, November. I just think it's highly unlikely you see a deal brokered until we get to that point in time. So the reality is we're probably in a state of limbo for the next several months. And I think the investing community, I think markets are going to have to come to terms with that.
Yeah, and Eamon, as you reported, 2 to 3 years was the horizon that Bessent himself had indicated could be realistic for a deal with the Chinese.
Yeah, these things take a long time. They take, multiple months, if not years, to do. And that's just when you're doing one trade deal at a time, let alone what the Trump administration is trying to do, which is, a sweeping set of trade deals with basically every country in the world. It's an enormous, enormous undertaking. But there are areas, for optimism or targets of opportunity, however you want to put it. I was at a reception at the British Embassy last night, and Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, is here in Washington to meet with Secretary Bessent today, and she said last night that she views this sort of anti-incumbent fervor that's taken place in Western democracies in recent years as a message that people inside these countries are not experiencing the economy well. It's not treating them well. They don't like what's happened as a result of globalization, and it's incumbent upon elected officials to do something about it. She sees the Trump administration's efforts in that vein, and she wants to find a way, she said, to work with them. So is there a UK deal potentially in the offing? Anything is possible here. It's a very volatile situation, but these things just take an enormous amount of time traditionally, and they're trying to do this in sort of super speed.
That's extra interesting because the UK, her predecessor was kicked out a couple of years ago when their bond markets revolted over similar fiscal problems.
Yeah.
Lanhee, which
she, by
brings
the way, is the first woman in the 800-year history of the job of Chancellor of the Exchequer. So that was kind of an interesting historical note. We don't have anything 800 years old.
I was going to say, it's a reminder of how old that country is.
Yeah.
Lanhee, next week Congress comes back. They're in session. We've heard some aggressive hopes that a budget deal can get done by Memorial Day or maybe even sooner. You don't seem to share that optimism. I'm not even sure whether to call it optimism at this point, because there seems to be this understanding that by bringing those tax cuts forward, you're going to cushion the economy now that it really needs that from the tariff shock, but at the same time add to the debt.
Yeah, I mean, here again, I just think it's going to take several months. This is a very complex deal they're trying to put together, not to mention the fact that you've got to find a lot of money in order to pay for these things. And I just think you've got differences between the House and the Senate, first of all. You've got some differences even within the House Republican Conference. And I think a lot of this is going to depend on what I would call hydraulic pressure that comes from the American people. And a lot of that won't build up until we get to the summer months. So I really wouldn't expect too much in the short term. I think this is something that ends up resolving itself after the August recess, quite frankly, when we get into the fall and it becomes abundantly clear that something has to get done before the end of the year. Congress doesn't work unless there is imminent pressure. And right now, hate to say it, there just isn't imminent pressure.
You don't think the economy is going to exert that pressure?
Well, it could be an intervening force, but remember, it's not going to be immediate. Even if Congress acts, it takes some time for fiscal policy to work its way through the economy. So the notion that they can act and we're going to see an immediate turnaround if there is some form of economic downturn, I think is wishful thinking. So we're going to have to let this play out and see where this goes. But I just don't see Congress having a lot of pressure to act again in the near term.
It's so ironic, Lanhee, that when you were with Romney and Ryan, that campaign was largely about the fiscal deficit and kind of the long term. And we're in much worse position now than we were then. The market seems concerned about it. There's some public concern about it, but we've come a long ways from what seemed to be a crisis at the time, but is now really far worse by many measures.
The top issue amongst voters, believe it or not, in 2011 and 2012 was the debt and deficits. It was the fiscal condition of the country.
It was a tea party,
and if you look at the way Americans think about the economy now, very few think in those terms. They do think about prices. They do think about the job market and the labor market, the strength of the labor market, but they don't think about the deficit and debt picture nearly as much as they used to. Whether we can come into a little bit of a renaissance around those issues remains to be seen, but there's no question we are in a far worse fiscal condition now than we were if we had acted, let's say, 10 or 12 years ago to address those fundamental predicates like the mandatory spending programs that have driven both deficits and debts higher.
No, I agree. But at the same time, you look at the economic performance and say, maybe it was worth it. Maybe, I hate to ask that question, but what level of debt to GDP matters? Or are we seeing it now in the fact that the 10-year is still at 4.5%?
Well, I think there's overhang, and there's no question. Look, the U.S. economy has been a bright light for some period of time now, but the question becomes what the potential could have been. And I don't know, look, we can't test the contrapositive, but what the potential could have been and what it is going forward if we don't address these challenges. I think you are going to begin to see some significant drag, particularly in combination with other forms of policy, right? We're talking about uncertainty around U.S.-China, uncertainty around tariffs. At some point, all of of this is going to end up impacting the broader macro picture. So I just think it is probably not a proper way to think about it when we say, well, look, we've survived just fine. I think that's probably true. But we've also indicated that looking ahead, there are going to be some challenges if these issues aren't addressed.
Absolutely. Eamon, a final word.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as the dust settles on the Doge efforts and Elon Musk, sort of leaves town quietly here, you're going to have to wait for some final accounting of what Doge was able to save. And the question is, were there any of those savings were ultimately long-term or not, right? Because Congress never canceled those appropriations for those funds. So, did Doge really succeed at all in making a dent in the spending issue in Washington is an open question, I think, at this point. It shows you just how hard it is to do it.
It is, and to the point that Mike Novogratz made last week, the amount that we're paying on interest on the debt has increased almost as much to offset any savings that they might have generated because interest rates are higher. So the perfect world is you start to get those interest rates down, and then at least this all feels like it was worth it. But at least we take your point, Lonnie, that don't look for the budget bill maybe before the late summer. Gentlemen, thanks. Appreciate you joining us today. Lonnie Chen and Eamon Javers. Dow's trying to turn positive, and the stocks are pacing all three major indices for solid gains this week. Growthy stocks have even been outperforming. Look at Tesla up almost 30%, or Cathie Wood's ARK ETF up 13%, while the staples, the lone sector in the red, down about 2%. But my next guest isn't jumping on that bandwagon just yet. He still thinks selling the rallies could be better than chasing them at this point. Steve Sosnick is back with us. He's the chief strategist at Interactive Brokers, and appreciate you joining us with all this going on. So why not take this opportunity to keep kind of dollar cost averaging, and why are you still cautious?
Well, dollar cost averaging is great if you're doing it on the way down. If you're chasing these things on the way up, that's kind of counterproductive at that point. So I think what's happened is what we're seeing now is we're still moving around so quickly, so aggressively. It's telling us that the market's having difficulty pricing stuff. Today we got a nice bit of a breather. And I know what this is going to sound facetious, but I think it's quite frankly because the president got on a plane to Italy and there's no news flow today.
Or earlier this week, we went hours without a tweet or a post on Truth Social. So kind of in a vacuum, the market is assuming the best.
Exactly.
But his commentary has also changed. I mean, he backed off on the Federal Reserve chair. He keeps kind of talking constructively about trade talks. He's not sitting there saying, yeah, I haven't talked to the Chinese and I don't care,
But, and that's actually why we rallied. I think that is the single most important reason for the rally now is this is the president that the market wanted. Think about why we rallied post-election. It was because you had a president who viewed the market as a barometer for his economic success. The market was also hoping for deregulation and tax cuts. Well, the other two are not coming anytime soon right away because they got deprioritized. Immigration came first, and then the tariffs, which is not a policy the market wanted, took precedence as the first economic policy. And then during the messaging, it was kind of almost a damn the torpedoes approach. And that was really very jarring to the market. All of a sudden, wait a minute, this is not at all what we'd expected. This is not at all what we signed up for. The messaging has changed this week, and I think the market feels much more comfortable with that. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of the money moving in.
Which some would say is a reason that you could now kind of pick up stocks here and say, okay, we're going to work this out. The adults are back in charge, even if they're referring to the market. So why still remain cautious? I mean, is it kind of what David Solomon said earlier this week, where even the delaying of the tariffs itself increases more uncertainty because now you don't know whether you still have to await that event or not? We kind of keep kicking the can down the road.
That's exactly it. I think what we've gotten is a bit of a reprieve, and the market's given a reprieve also for earnings season. Think about if you had a whole range of companies just 3 months ago coming out and saying, well, we don't really know what our guidance is. We would have throttled those companies. In this case, they're all getting a pass, which is understandable.
Although companies like United, I mean, the airlines had been down 40% before they finally said, yeah, we have no idea.
And United, at least, I like the fact that they did an if-then statement.
Yes.
But for the most part, not every company's gotten away with it, but you've had a number of companies basically saying, you know what, we're not going to withdraw our guidance. We're not going to go forward with it. We're going to add to, in many ways, we're responding to the uncertainty by remaining uncertain. And the market's given them a pass. Well, that'll last maybe 3 months because at some point they have to deliver. And so I think that right now we're in a bit of a lull, and that's why I think it's not necessarily wrong to be picking up stocks. It's not necessarily wrong to be picking up things that have value, because there are a lot of stuff got thrown out with a lot of good stuff got thrown out with the bad. But chasing rallies in a framework like this is probably not a smart. Is just seems like a way to add risk at an inappropriate time to just blindly add risk.
So you think we keep grinding, maybe grinding lower throughout maybe the spring, early summer? I mean, what are the events to you that we clear that more the administration's kind of rhetoric change that then signals to you, okay, now it's a more durable buying opportunity?
We got the better rhetoric, but now we need to see the movement. We need to see some sort of easing of tensions with China. It would be nice to see a deal with one of the countries who we're talking deals with. When Rachel Reeves spoke earlier this week, she said the U.S. and Britain are still fairly far apart on a deal. Japan is not particularly close to a deal. So I'd like to see some movement with a friendly country that tells us that a deal is coming, other than just adding to this fact of, okay, the clock started at 90 days. Now we're at day, call it 80 or 75. At some point, the clock either gets reset and kicks the can down the road, which I'm not sure the market loves, or we have to see something concrete.
Quickly, and to put it differently, is it to say so? I take your point about what you're waiting for. I bet a lot of investors are jumping ahead to that conclusion. Yeah. We're going to get the positive trade announcement. It's going to be from India. It's going to be from Japan, what have you. So if we don't get that, then do we go back down? Does that kind of take us, back on the roller coaster by another 1,000 or whatever points?
Probably, maybe not as quickly, but I think it then grinds lower because the market needs something. It's nice to think of something constructive, but ultimately we need something constructive, and I think that will be a bigger key. Is can we deliver on a constructive news rather than just talk in a more constructive tone?
We'll leave it there. We have a couple of additional comments from the president, perhaps making these on the plane. Who knows? Talking about a few different issues, including Gaza, but on tariffs, he said we'll be reasonable on tariffs. And he thinks the markets are adjusting to tariff policy. So do these kind of headlines make you feel at the margin, I see the Dow almost positive on this, feel at the margin like this is a real change of heart, or no?
I think it shows a softening of the tone, which is good, and a softening of the mindset. It's really not the tone so much as actually the mindset. Maybe it means there's some flexibility. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Bessent has been doing most of the messaging, and he's got a very sober tone as opposed to sort of Lutnick's, I'm going to call it more histrionic tone. I think that's very helpful as well. And I think that kind of commentary is great. At some point, we do need some follow through, but I think it tells us that maybe they're not going to be completely as hardline as we'd feared, right. and that is why this rally has been somewhat justified.
Yep, NASDAQ up 1.25%, S&P 2/3%, Dow is up 5 points. Nice tone into the weekend, perhaps. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. Steve Sosnick with Interactive Brokers. And coming up, we'll have more on Apple's big pivot, potentially. They're reportedly planning to source all U.S. iPhones from India now. That would be about 60 million units. Could it be a sign a trade deal with India is also imminent? We'll get you the latest. Apple shares are up 0.25% today.